Welcome back, everybody. Yes, you came to the right video, okay. Yes, my hair is blue, okay. And yes, we are going to be talking about colorism, as you can see from the title of this video. So stick around, go ahead and get yourself a nice little cool beverage, maybe a little snack. After the intro, we're gonna get right into it. So today we're going to be talking about colorism. I'm excited for this video. If you saw my first video ever talking about it, I have done research in the past around colorism. So I'm really excited to get into today's topic. This probably won't be my last video about colorism because it is just so rampant in every community of color. But I will be kind of focusing on the Black community in this video. But I will also talk about how it is rampant in other communities as well. So now we're going to get into some historical information that I think y'all need to know. So let's get a working definition of what colorism is. So colorism is essentially just the discrimination of someone based on the pigmentation of their skin. So the lightness or darkness of their skin, and someone, having some preconceived notions about them, someone discriminating against someone because of just that alone. So what gets pushed down a lot of times in movies and in history books and things like that is that dark-skinned people were in the field and light-skinned people were in the house. And obviously if somebody's enslaved, like, both are tragic or both are terrible, but that kind of also gets at this notion that, like, okay, so darker-skinned people are just like, they were just so bad and no one wanted to see them, no one could even bear them being in the house, that they were outside doing the real labor, and the light-skinned people, whatever. And I'm here to tell y'all, I'm here to give y'all a real information that is all false. False. What you see in the movies is false. What you see in the history books is false. And I'm going to tell you why it's false. So there was a man named William Lynch. William Lynch was a terrible person. Like most slave masters, like most, whatever, he was a terrible person. And he gave this famous speech to a bunch of white slave owners. And someone obviously recorded the speech and then put it in like a letter. And now it's known as the Willie Lynch letter. So if you've ever heard of the Willie Lynch letter, that's what it's referring to. But it was a speech. And I'm going to read some snippets of the speech verbatim, as well as putting them on the screen for you. In my bag here, I have a foolproof method for controlling your Black slaves. I guarantee every one of you that if installed correctly, it will control the slave for at least 300 years. A little bit later down in the letter, don't forget, you must pitch the old Black male versus the young Black male. The young Black male against the old Black male. You must use the dark-skinned slaves versus the light-skinned slaves, and the light-skinned slaves versus the dark-skinned slaves. You must use the female versus the male, and the male versus the female. You must also have white servants and overseers who distrust all Blacks. So that is the speech that he gave to the white slave owners. And imagine just a big room, he's giving them, and the slave masters are sitting there taking notes, because that's essentially what happened. So it was basically all just an indoctrinated lie that someone pitched and was like, okay, if you create fractions within their community, then it will divide them and it'll make it easier to control them. This is why Black unity is so important, side note, but whatever. So this is not to say that obviously some slave owners are probably like, okay, I'm gonna go, back to my slave route and make the darker skinned people work and whatever, and the lighter skinned people be in the house. But for the most part, all the Black people were kind of mixed up. It wasn't like all the light skinned people were inside. The light skinned people were also outside working, the field, and the dark skinned people were just as much in the house. But the Willie Lynch letter kind of is proof that this was something that was tried to push down onto people, that white people were like, okay, let's create this false narrative. Let's create this false history that separates them and just creates little divisions within their community to break them apart. And unfortunately it worked. So another reason that to really think about, it's actually kind of logical. So a lot of the wives, so think about the wives of the slave masters, they did not want light-skinned people in the house. Because a light-skinned person in the house, obviously, you have slaves for a long time and they grow up, unfortunately, in the house, and then they become older, whatever. The white wife was like, I don't want this reminder that my husband probably cheated on me in the house. So they were like, actually, we're gonna have like the darker skinned people in the house just as much, and the lighter skinned people outside. We know that, you know, the white slave masters a lot of times raped the women. It wasn't like a secret little, you know, hot and steamy affair or whatever. Not that affairs are hot and steamy. I don't know. It was a way for the white wife to be reminded that, like, my husband probably cheated on me, and that's why there's this little mixed baby running around. Well, that's just something to really think about, and this is why history is so important. You know, don't ever let people make it seem like history is not important for the present, because it's really just gets at the idea that this colorism thing, like especially within the Black community, but in general, is literally just all based on a lie. It's based on the lie in general. Racism is all based on the lie that, you know, Europeans are better than everyone else. A lie. Lies! The lie! You know, that was just something that somebody thought of to really try to control people. And unfortunately, it worked, but knowledge is power. Black knowledge is Black power. And now that you know the truth, you can really be like, actually, it's all a lie, and start to, you know, let people know as well. It's really important to talk about it. And yeah, I know I really busted probably like a lot of y'all's bubbles, but it needs to be busted. So personally, obviously, like, I am dark skinned, grew up dark skin. I mean, like, my skin is my skin, and you know, I definitely internalize a lot of negative images and just negative things that people told me, you know, rhetoric that was being passed around just growing up. And I just kind of always just had like I grew up very insecure. I was also, you know, I'm not skinny, so, you know, I feel like when you're a little, just like, we were always just a little chunky, you know, it's just like a little, you know, it's just different. There were instances where I was like maybe one of the only few Black people, or especially being a dark-skinned woman, it's just hard. Your friends keep getting the dudes and you just not, or like, you know, certain people just tell you little things, or you're pretty for a dark-skinned girl, or like, you know, you should really stay out the sun. Like, just little things, it really starts to get at you, for me anyway, and I know other people can probably agree. And again, because colorism is global, this is something that, you know, if you grew up the darkest person in your Latinx family, you might also have similar things. If you were dark in the Asian community, you know, you might also have similar things. From my experience, I just remember just always just feeling just so like, I know I'm ugly. Like, I know I'm ugly, and then I watch TV, and then I see that I'm ugly because I'm not being represented as like the pretty girl or the smart girl, or like, you know, things like that. And then I go on social media and the same thing, and then I look at these rap videos and it's the same thing. And this documentary Dark Girls came out, and I remember I watched it, and I literally watched it, and I went in my room and I started crying, because I was just like, okay. But it wasn't like it was like I'm sad, but it was also like a realization that, you know, what I was experiencing wasn't just me being dramatic and me feeling like, oh, like I'm ugly for some reason, or I'm ugly because I'm dark. I feel like I watched that and I was like, oh wow, okay, so other Black people also experienced this. Also, other dark girls also felt this way. It wasn't just me. And I think, you know, either way, it's not great, but I think that realization, knowing that it's not just me and it's a bigger system at play that's like tricking these people's minds and promoting these images, is the problem. I'm not the problem. Success. So knowing I grew up this way and just having like these, you know, perceptions, and having to really be on a journey of like self-love and finding myself like even a little bit attractive, let alone like where I am now. I'm feeling myself. I'm feeling myself. I'm feeling myself. I'm feeling myself. I'm feeling my. I mean, it took a long time, and it's definitely, I'm still like growing and changing and stuff like that. But when I came to college, I was just like, okay, like if I get the chance, I do want to study this and learn this, and like, you know, just just talk about it more, because it's so, I feel like the colorism is just so important to talk about, because if not, it could just go over people's head, or people could just be like, it's not really that important, we're all Black, we're all beautiful. And it's like, well, that's not that's not really what you're saying, you know, in the movies that you do, or that's not really what you're saying in the women that you date. So, you know, I wanted to talk about this, so I did a research project where I just basically analyzed the show The Proud Family and how it actually had undertones of colorist ideas. And there's a lot of shows, unfortunately, black shows that promotes colorist ideas. Martin kind of promotes the colorist, you know, undertone. So I was just like, okay, well, I grew up watching these shows. Like, I grew up watching The Proud Family. I know a lot of people did. So knowing that, you know, media has just a big impact on how we see ourselves and how we treat other people, I wanted to interview children. So I interviewed like children and asked them just kind of indirectly about their biases and just presented images to them. And I was just like, well, do you think this person is smarter? Rank the people from, like, you know, nicest to the least nice, or, you know, things like that. And from the research, I basically gathered that children are 100% affected by the images that they see in the media. Media representation is so important, y'all. Like, it's so important. But, you know, they are you know, affected by images that they see, and it affects how they look at themselves, but not only how they look at themselves, how they treat other people. Now, one thing that's really interesting in terms of colorism, and I'm gonna just right now speak about just the black community. I did a lot of research just about how it affects men and women differently, because I was just like, am I only gonna talk to young girls about this? Am I only gonna talk to, like, young men about this? And it definitely affects men and women differently. Men, a lot of times the colorism affects them, like, their ideas of their own masculinity. So, like, a lot of times dark men are seen as, like, more masculine, but then they're also seen as more dangerous, more rough, more, you know, whatever. And I mean, we're in a time right now where, you know, talking about police brutality. If you really look at the victims, the black male victims, all of them for the most part were darker. And again, so that's why I'm like, colorism is so deep, because it's promoting this idea that, well, if you're a big black man or you're a dark black man, you're more dangerous versus a light-skinned man. And light-skinned men are affected differently. We see, like, you know, this whole Drake thing, I'm in my feelings. Like, you know, light-skinned men a lot of times aren't seen as masculine. They're a lot of times seen as more in their feelings, more emotional, more, you know, nurturing, and just more associated with, like, feminine, you know, attributes. More like the pretty boy, whatever, just, you know, just it's these things. So it really affects men really differently. And in terms of women, I mean, I can speak from my experience. I know it affected my self-confidence more, but also for lighter skinned women, like it also affects them negatively, because they're oftentimes seen as, like, very, you know, they don't get mad, or they're very, like, calm, or they're very, like, poised. And then also, like, lighter skinned women, similar with lighter skinned men, aren't seen as black, like, as, like, okay, well, you know, is somebody, you know, mixed, or like, oh, maybe because you're lighter, you're probably whiter, so maybe you're more, like, you know, uppity versus dark skinned people. And that's all a lie. I mean, it's just all stupid. It's just all so stupid. Like, you can't look at somebody's skin tone. I can't control my skin tone, like, and that shouldn't have to do with, like, attributes within myself. And that's not to say that dark skinned people, like, I grew up, I did get the, like, oh, like, you're like white on the inside, or like so not to say that, you know, dark-skinned people don't get told that, you know, they are, like, white, or they're, like, an Oreo or whatever, but light-skinned people, I know in terms of, like, my research and just things I've hear it a lot. So, you know, it's so deep. That's what it's really important to talk about, because it's just so deep and it's just so stupid. But there really are stereotypes that are associated with, you know, lighter skin versus darker skin. So one thing I really want to drive home, the last point I have before I get into the tips, is that colorism is really global, y'all. Like, I talked about slavery within the US and, like, the black community and, like, things like that, but it is way bigger than just, like, you know, darker people were in the field, whatever. Now this idea definitely, like, seeps into the minds of, like, everyone, but, you know, in Asia, in India, in Africa, a lot of parts in Africa, specifically Nigeria, skin bleaching products are, like, the rage. Like, they are, like, everyone is using a soap that is going to over time slowly lighten their skin. And it's because a lot of times in these places, darker skin is associated with being more poor, because this idea that if you're working outside, an outside job is like a field job, which means, you know, it's not as good as being inside, you know, and having this fancy job. So a lot of times darker skin is associated with less money and less status, versus light skin being associated with like a higher status, people having more money, people being more successful. It's not just about like, oh, I'm insecure, or I, you know, being pretty. Of course, that's very real because that's your confidence, but it's also as big as status. There's this picture, I don't know if you've seen it, I'm gonna put it up, of these black like entertainers, just these black men that have like the most money within them. They probably have just like tens of billions of dollars, and it was all their wives behind them, and none of them were dark. None of their wives were dark. And again, we see like, okay, so you have this status now, you need to go and get yourself a light-skinned wife. So, you know, when I was doing my research, I was trying to figure out if I should talk about colorism globally, or focus on something very specific. And just a note to anyone, if you're doing research or thinking about doing research, it's always good to focus on something very specific, and like, not just, because I was like, I'm ready to talk about all of this. But when I was doing my research, you know, I looked at, okay, well, yes, I know that skin bleaching is a real thing. You know, I know that people are buying these products. I know that Black China started a whole skin bleaching campaign and went to Nigeria and is doing great. But I'm like, why? So I came across some really interesting information. So in Jamaica, people bleach their skin. But the reason people bleach their skin is because they realize that if they are darker, they are less likely to get a job. That's how real it is. You know that because of your skin tone, because of your natural hue, you are less likely to get a job. And the reason they're less likely to get a job is because, you know, at these jobs, they want people who look, you know, to the standard of beauty, who look lighter, who look like they, you know, haven't been outside all day working, who look, you know, just closer to the European standard of beauty. And again, we have dark people who are attributed to being, you know, more rough, being more, you know, like ghetto or whatever. So like, that's how deep it is. So it's not even just that like people are bleaching their skin. Obviously it's bad, you know, to want to bleach your skin, but for some people, they feel like it's a necessity. Like, I have to bleach my skin because I have to get a job. And that's how it is a lot of places. If you are a part of, you know, any of these communities, if you're in the Black community, you just want to talk about it, or, you know, talk about maybe your experiences with it, definitely please comment below. You know, we need to be having these conversations, and we're now going to get into some tips when you are having these conversations or things like this come up. What should you do, say? How should you move forward? So the first tip would be to check your friends. Check people. Check your boyfriends. Check your girlfriend, check your mom, check your family members, check that uncle. Like, just check people. And I mean, it's a lot to be like, hey, you're wrong. But I mean, if anything, just maybe question, like pose a question. I think a lot of times when you pose a question to people, I feel like they are a little more like, like if you be like, if somebody's like, oh, like she needs to get out the sun, like she's already dark enough, be like, why do you think she's, you know, too dark? Why do you think she needs to be lighter? Like, question pose. So just check your friends, check the people around you, just check them. So tip number 2, don't fall into what society says. Don't fall into what society tells you. Society will tell you that, you know, lighter is better, skinnier is better, straight hair is better.
Not on my watch. Not on my...
Just all these lies, and just really don't fall into that. Don't fall into, you know, what the rap videos will tell you. Don't fall into who the love interest always is. Don't fall, just don't, like, really question it. If you know you're watching something, you're just like, how come there's like the same like light-skinned girl that keeps getting chosen for all the roles? Like, you know, question that. Like, be like, why is that? You know, and just don't fall into the hype, and know that that shouldn't be the case. Don't believe the hype. In that same vein, don't fetishize a certain group of people. So don't fetishize, you know, dark-skinned women thinking that they're more, you know, down for this or whatever. Don't fetishize light-skinned women thinking they're, you know, this way. Don't fetishize, don't fetishize, you know, groups of people. Date who you want to date, you know. Maybe I'll do a video. Maybe there's always this conversation about like preferences, so maybe I'll do a preference video at some point. But just, you know, don't fetishize groups of people. Don't assume that light-skinned women are gonna be like this, so that's why you like them more. Like, just don't do it. Don't do it. Question yourself. Another tip, a really important tip, you know, when people talk about their experiences with colorism, don't just shrug it off. Like, and I'm not saying that like you shrug it off or something, but don't just think like, okay, they're just being insecure today, or like they're just, you know, like, oh, maybe they're just having a bad day. Like if they're telling you like, you know, every time we go to the club, like nobody's looking at me, they or like guys always come to you. Or if you have a friend that, you know, is always like, oh, I can't be in the sun too long, I'm really scared of doing too much, like really, you know, be like, you know, take that seriously. There's a lot of trauma that's associated with, you know, repeatedly being told like you're ugly, and then watching shows that kind of promote that, and then watching, you know, rap videos that promote that, and hearing rappers talk about, you know, it's a lot of trauma that's associated with that people have to unlearn over time. So just take your friends, or even if it's you having these, like take yourself seriously and take that, you know, pain seriously, and don't just think like it's just me being insecure. And lastly, you know, really empower people. Tell, you know, little dark kids that they're beautiful, that their skin is perfect, that they, you know, they can be in the sun and get darker. They can be light. They can be fine. Like just really start to like just shift the narrative and speak these things into existence. I feel like colorism, like obviously it's systematic, but it's also very just like social. Like it's a lot of the little things that people say that you know, that people kind of talk about. Better messages start being said, and I think that people are starting to do it, but let's just really keep it going, because you know all of this is based on lies. Like, maybe you're someone, you watch this and you're like, I wanted to know if you're somebody who, you know, always felt less than because you were dark. It's not true. I'm looking at you right now. I'm looking at you. It's not true. It's all literally based on lies. I talked about it, history, it's all based on a lie. It's not true. And you know, this isn't necessarily gonna make you feel better about the things that may have happened to you, but I just can say from my experience, I definitely think it made it a little bit just easier to know that like it's a lot bigger than just like, you know, people keep telling me this because, you know, it's just a fact. It's not a fact. And people keep telling you, you know, people keep not coming up to you or talking to you at the club, or, you know, whatever, because they're indoctrinated by this, by a system, by a terrible system that, you know, lets cops get off for killing people innocently, that lets rapists go free. Like this is an unjust system. This is a terrible system. This is a terrible idea. So just know that it's not you. You are not less than. You are beautiful. You are important. You are amazing. So it's all lies.
Love yourself. How the hell you gonna love somebody else? Can I get an amen? Can I get an amen? Where my people at?
So thank you so much. I know this is just a heavy topic. That is all I have to say for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe, continue to, you know, share this knowledge. It's very important that we know it. It's very important. We got to start knowing the truth. Black knowledge is Black power. I will see you all in 2 weeks. Thank you so much and have a good week.